Everyone thinks spiritual seekers want enlightenment. The Fellowship of Friends wanted something else entirely. I've studied enough closed communities to recognize the pattern: charisma, isolation, and a promise that dissolves the moment you question it. But what I found in the Fellowship of Friends was stranger. This wasn't a compound in the desert. It was a network of wealthy believers spanning continents, all feeding money into a single man's obsession with cheating death itself. October 1965. A man named Robert Earl Burton, call sign Robert, was living in San Francisco, teaching high school literature. Nothing remarkable. He was 41, divorced, searching. Then something shifted. He claimed he'd experienced a spiritual awakening, a revelation that he was the reincarnation of multiple historical figures: Socrates, Plato, Gurdjieff, not just influenced by them. Literally them, returned. Most people would have dismissed this as personal delusion, but Burton had something else: magnetism. He began hosting salons in his apartment. Intellectuals came, artists, musicians, wealthy patrons intrigued by his claim that he could teach them the fourth way, a system promising conscious evolution and, crucially, immortality. Not metaphorical immortality, literal, eternal, physical life. By 1970, the fellowship was formally established. Burton had moved to a house in the Berkeley Hills. Followers called him teacher. He told them they were part of an elite conscious group, selected by higher forces for transformation. The cost of entry, everything. Followers were expected to surrender their bank accounts, their careers, their families if those relationships threatened the group's cohesion. What's critical here, and I've read the membership testimonies myself, is that Burton never positioned himself as a con artist. He believed his own mythology. He performed rituals he claimed would accelerate his students' evolution. He instructed them on diet, sex, art, music, all supposedly calibrated to unlock dormant abilities. They weren't being deceived. They were being recruited into a shared delusion. The fellowship's reach expanded through the 1970s. Followers established communities in Oregon, Nevada, Europe. They purchased property. They opened restaurants, galleries, publishing houses, all fronts for generating revenue that flowed upward to Burton. By the mid-1970s, hundreds of people had joined. Thousands of dollars poured in monthly. None of them knew what was coming. March 1978. A former member named Nikki Scully broke ranks and began speaking publicly about her experiences. She described psychological manipulation, sexual coercion, financial exploitation. She said Burton had told followers that sleeping with him was spiritually necessary, that his energy could only transfer through intimate contact. The allegations shattered the fellowship's public image. But here's what surprised me. The fellowship didn't collapse, it contracted, yes. Some followers left, but the core remained. Burton doubled down. He told remaining members that the accusations were attacks from mechanical forces, lower-dimensional entities trying to prevent their spiritual ascension. The persecution, he said, proved they were on the right path. The 1980s were quieter externally, but internally the mechanisms of control tightened. Burton introduced dominoes, a practice where followers would confess private thoughts and secrets to each other, which would then be reported back to him. Total transparency, total vulnerability, total control. Members were told that questioning Burton was a sign of spiritual weakness. By the 1990s, the fellowship had evolved into something more sophisticated. They weren't a fringe cult anymore, they were a network. Wealthy members, venture capitalists, Silicon Valley professionals, began funding Burton's new obsession: actual life extension research. He wanted to find the biological key to immortality. Science would validate what he'd promised spiritually. I found records showing the fellowship invested in cryonics research, anti-aging pharmaceuticals, and consciousness uploading experiments. None of it worked, obviously, but that wasn't the point. The point was keeping followers believing that Burton had a plan, that immortality was real, that their sacrifice had purpose. The promise itself was the cage. What sustained the fellowship for decades was a simple mechanism: sunk cost. Followers had invested their lives, their money, their relationships. Walking away meant admitting they'd been wrong. It meant facing the void they'd tried to fill with Burton's mythology. So they stayed, they rationalized, they told themselves the suffering meant something. The Fellowship of Friends still exists. It's smaller now, maybe a few hundred active members, but it persists. Burton, now in his late 90s, still teaches. His followers still claim that he's unlocked secrets of consciousness that science hasn't yet grasped. They still promise that immortality is coming. The riddle remains unsolved. What fascinates me most is how a group this visible, this documented, maintained its grip for so long. The answer isn't mysterious. It's human. People want to believe they're special. They want to believe there's a shortcut to meaning. They want to believe death can be negotiated. Burton simply offered them that bargain in exchange for everything else. The fellowship of friends teaches us that cults don't require isolation or poverty or obvious abuse. They require only three things: a charismatic figure, a promise that transcends ordinary reality, and an audience desperate enough to believe it. Everything else follows. The money flows, the control tightens, and the members never realize they are inside until it's too late. The pursuit of immortality is ancient. Every religion, every philosophy has grappled with it. But when that pursuit becomes personal, when one man claims to have cracked the code, and followers surrender everything to that claim, something darker emerges. Not enlightenment, entrapment, and the cruelest part, the promise is never fulfilled. It never can be. Subscribe. Each week we uncover another cult that rewrote reality for its followers, and the psychology that made them believe it.